the kingdom. Takanuva, Toa of Light, fell through an interdimensional space, trying hard not to scream. At a moment before, he had stopped through a dimensional portal created by Butaka. His mission: travel to Cardanui and warn the 6th Takanuva that there was a disaster about to occur. Somehow, though, this trip was not going as planned. Takanuva was being buffered about, catching glimpses of now and then weird other worlds filled with beings both familiar and unfamiliar. He could guess that if he somehow wound up in one of those places, he might never find his way back to his own universe. Suddenly there was a jolt worse than any before. It was spinning wildly out of control. There was an instant of complete darkness followed by a very bright light. And then Takanuva slammed onto a rocky shore, lay there stunned for a long time. When he finally lifted his head, it was to view a sight he could have never imagined. The city before him was vast. It made Metro look like a collection of stone-cutter shacks. Multiple design styles had combined to create this megalopolis that stretched as far as the eye could see. Some of the buildings looked like the ones in Metro. You recognized the Colosseum, for example. Others were totally strange and some almost primitive. Takanuva glanced up at the sky. No, it didn't look like the one over Metro Nui. It looked, oh no, it couldn't be, he thought. It was the same shade of blue as the one over the island of Mata Nui. That's impossible, he said to himself. Everyone left Mata Nui to move on to Metro Nui months ago, and Mata Nui was never this size or filled with so many beings and buildings. He stood up and looked around. Everywhere he could see Matoran of all kinds hard at work. That certainly wasn't unusual, of course. The fact was that they were working side by side with Borak, Skakti, and Viserak. It was downright shocking. Hey, a voice said from behind him. Who are you? Where did you come from? Takanuva returned. A Gamatoran. My crew was there. She gave no sign of recognizing him. I'm Toa Takanuva, he answered. Can you tell me where I am? You're not Takanuva, said Maku, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Try again, or would you rather we call the Dark Hunters? But I am Takanuva. I know I look different, but that's for sure, laughed Maku. You're a lot taller, or have you never seen Turaga, Takanuva, stranger? Turaga? Sputtered Takanuva. He recovered quickly. Maybe I was a little confused. Tell me, do you know where I can find Jowler? At the Great Furnace, naturally, said Maku, suspicion in his voice. What do you want from him? I have, a message for him from an old friend, Takanuva replied. It took some doing, but he finally convinced Maku to escort him into the city in which she called the Kingdom of the Great Spirit. The first person she brought over to him was a tall, strange warrior carrying a massive axe. He looked at Takanuva for over a minute and then nodded. He's a shapeshifter and he really does think he's Takanuva. Thanks, Axon, said Maku. So he's crazy then. Not sure, said Axon. He reached out and snatched away Takanuva's staff of light. It might be better if we walk him around the city with this, as you know how the Turaga feels about citizens carrying weapons. They walked through the streets of the city as shock followed shock for Takanuva. Over there was Matoran buying wares from street stands run by Vortex. Further on, a Skakti was hawking a show, boasting about the amazing Viserak pyramid that could be seen inside for just a few widgets. And on every street corner, there's presence of law enforcers. Not Toa, not even Vaki, but Dark Hunters. Maku left Takanuva with Toa Jowler. The Toa fire looked the same as he always had, but he viewed Takanuva with wariness from the Gamatoran had. Well, you're obviously not Takanuva, he said, but as long as you're not a Makuta in disguise, you're well welcome in our kingdom. What can I do for you? Just talk to me, Takanuva said. Tell me about this place. Is this really the island of Mata Nui? Jowler laughed. Wow, I haven't heard it called that in close to 10,000 years. Anyway, yes, this was the island of Mata Nui, but it's a lot more than that now. I see that, but what I mean is how. Jowler pointed to a massive stone wall. That's what you meant. There's a wall. There's the wall of history in every district. Kopaki made sure of that. You'll find answers there. Jeller paused, and then added, "You know, it's funny how I never met you, but somehow you seem very familiar. Why did you ask me that? Why did you ask me anyway?" Takanuva thought about telling Jowler the truth. He could share all sorts of things only the real Takanuva would know. But he decided that at best he would scare his old friend, and at worst he would wind up arrested by the hunters. Right, well, I'll meet Araga Takanuva, and he told me what a great friend you were, and he said if I was ever in trouble come see you. Well, that's a pleasant surprise, said Jowler. None of the Toa Mahari are very popular around here, even after all this time. Even after how things turned out, I don't think anyone's even seen a Toro for 5,000 or 6,000 years. The name startled Takanuva. The Toro was dead, killed when he sacrificed his life to save the great spirit Motunui and the universe. A theory was startling to form in his mind of the Toa of Light, and the wall of history was where it could be proven or disproven. He thanked Jowler and hurried on. Yes, it was all right. The first thing he noticed was on the date. It was 10,000 years after he had left Metru Nui, but that wasn't half as surprising as the story in the carvings told. The Toa Mahari had journeyed underwater to the underwater city of Mahari Nui to search for the Mask of Life, just as he recalled. But after doing that, the story changed. Toa Toro, referred in the carvings, was the disgraced one. He had hesitated a few moments too long in his pursuit of the mask. The core of the universe had been sealed off, making it impossible for him to retrieve the great spirit Motunui with the mask. And Motunui, ruler and protector of the entire Matoran universe, had died. But the tale didn't end there. The Turaga of Metru Nui had been planning for just such, and eventually mobilizing the Toa, the Vortex, and the Skakti, and many of the universe's other species. They led a mass migration to the surface over the course of a few days. The Order of Motunui revealed its existence and helped as well. Even more and more beings poured from Metru Nui and up to Motunui. Those who were already there worked to construct a floating platforms to hold them all. Naturally, not everyone made it. It just wasn't physically possible to evacuate a universe in that short amount of time, but many did. It was obvious that by working together they could survive on the surface, and so the concept of the kingdom was born. Only 2 species from the original universe were not represented here. The Zygarde had refused to evacuate, choosing death over accepting existence from the Matoran. The Makuta attempted to migrate, only to find their way buried by Toa Takanuva and the Order. Together they drove the Makuta back underground, and no sign of them has been seen of them since. His destiny has been achieved. Takanuva sacrificed his power to bring a new generation of Toa into being, including Toa Kapura, Toa Balta, Toa Dalu, Toa Valaika, Toa Defrak, and a new Toa of Light, Tanma. Takanuva had then become a Turaga and was named leader of the kingdom in recognition of his heroism. Things got stranger from there. Turaga Takanuva had formed a new ruling council consisting of Turaga Duma, a prime Skakti warlord, a Barag Rudaka, the Shadow One Helrix, and a Naira Matoran. Dark Hunters had become primary law enforcers, while Toa were put to work using their powers to help the city in other ways. First, they prevented the collapse of the original island in the wake of Motunui's death. Then they created a new and more stable landmasses to support the Matoran and expansion. After 10 millennia, the kingdom was now a megacity and home to all the survivors of the original universe. Turaga Takanuva and his council ruled from the Colosseum. Toa Takanuva not only couldn't resist paying a visit to his other self, but needed to find some way out of here. The wall had showed him he had not simply traveled to his future somehow. This was not his universe at all. Well, he had to admit that part of his wish he didn't have to leave. Who would have imagined that Matoro's failure would have resulted in a paradise like this? Everywhere he looked, he saw beings of different species working side by side. Only Toa and hunters carried weapons, but it looked as if they hadn't been used in ages. He expected to find the Colosseum heavily guarded, but the opposite case, the seat of the government was open to all the kingdom. Instead of asking to see the Turaga Takanuva, though he had sent a message to Helrex, it was short, reminding her of what her original plan was, to warn the Takanuva about the conditions in Cardanui and asking if she could get him to see the Turaga. That produced results. Takanuva was escorted by Trinuma into the Turaga's chamber at the top of the Colosseum. Turaga Takanuva was in conference with Toa Tanma and Udaka. Resting in the center of the large table was a Rakshi head. You say the Rakshi appeared in the center of the city near the Paraka fountain, the Turaga said. Udaka nodded. A bunch of Fematoran were there, feeding Avik and Thok and making plans to make iron supporters for the western landmass. They spotted a Panrak and called the hunters, who took care of it, and that was all that was left. It shouldn't have been able to get through, said Tanma briefly. Maybe it was an accident, Turaga Takanuva offered, sounding as if he didn't believe it himself. Maybe one just slipped through right before the light barriers went up, and it has been hiding here this whole time. I wish, said Toa Tanma. The light barriers are going down, said Takanuva. All three turned at him and startled. I know a little about light. Turaga Takanuva started to say something and then stopped. He turned to Udaka and Tanma and asked them to leave the chamber. Once they were gone, he said, "How is this possible?" "You know then," said the Toa. "How could I not?" said the Turaga. "And Helrex told me what she planned to do if things had not gone differently. You're from someplace else, I take it." The Toa nodded. "Someplace else, it is true. Though it is not someplace as peaceful. You have done an amazing job," he smiled. I'm proud of me." The Turaga shook his head. It can't last. Anu and the others have done all they can, but the original island cannot survive much longer. We'll have to move on again, perhaps to the stars if Nuju and Nubaru's project works. But until then, the Makuta, if they still live, must not be allowed into the kingdom. Turaga Takanuva looked at his Toa counterpart from another universe, not his own. "I know this isn't your world, and I know the message you carry is vital, but Tanma and the entire kingdom would need to use your aid. When you're done, you can find a way to send you back. Will you help?" Toa Takanuva nodded. "Of course, but I can use my staff of light back." Turaga Takanuva smiled. "Oh, that weapon went out of style 10,000 years ago. I think we can find you something better than that, old friend." Part 2. Turaga Takanuva led Takanuva out of the Colosseum and into the eastern portion of the vast city. Toa Tanma trailed along behind, not saying much. He wasn't sure whether to be grateful another Toa of Light had arrived to help him, or upset that the Turaga didn't think he could handle a job of his own. They all arrived in a small, narrow building in an alleyway not far from the shore. There was no knob or handle on the outside of the front door, nor any carving to indicate who lived there. Turaga Takanuva rapped twice with his staff. A small panel opened and halfway up the door. No eyes were visible through it, but a Matoran voice said, "What's the password?" Takanuva looked at the two Toa. They've lived among us for ages and still like to play at secrecy. Turning back the door, he said, This is Turaga Takanuva. Open up." "Wrong password, not even close." "This is one," said the annoyed Turaga. "I have a troop of Borak with nothing to do. If you like, I can have them tear down this building and turn it into a park." There was a pause, and the voice said, "Close enough," and the door swung open. The three visitors entered the dark hallway, which twisted and turned far more than one would expect, given the size of the building. A door at the end led to a small workshop cluttered with all sorts of armor, weapons, and other gadgets. A lone female Tauren was tinkering with a nasty-looking projectile launcher when they walked in. He looked up at Turaga Takanuva, surprised and annoyed. "You know the routine," he said. "Leave your request in this slot outside and we'll get to it." "Yes, I know that's how you Naira crafters prefer to work," Turaga Takanuva replied, making an effort to work to keep his temper. But this is the crisis. I have two Toa who needs weaponry." The Matoran looked at Takanuva up and down. "Looks like his color scheme can use some work too, but I might just have something here that could be of use." After a few minutes of rummaging through claw catchers, Rotuga launchers, and parts of Viserak battle wagon, the Matoran emerged with a tri-bladed lance. He handed it to Toa Takanuva and said, Now aim that far at that far wall. Just use a little bit of power, not even enough to singe the stone." The Toa took the lance, aimed it, and focused it, releasing it the thin sample of elemental light. In the next instant, the blast of energy blew a hole the size of a Kanoka disc in the wall. "How?" said Takanuva, looking down at the lance. "Most Toa tools just channel power," the Matoran said, smiling. "This one amplifies it. And if that's not enough," the Matoran searched through, this time emerging with a launcher. "We don't have a name for this one yet. Too new. Draws light from the environment and fires it as a sphere. It hasn't been tested yet, though." "Fine," said Turaga Takanuva. He turned to the two Toa. "I suggest you start right away. There's no telling how much time we have." Once they were back on the street, Tama wanted to head right for the nearest light bearer, but the Toa Takanuva held him up. "There's something I want to do first," said Takanuva. "I want to see Mitoro." "That coward!" spat Tama. "If not for him, we would still have our homes, our universe. We could go see him. You can go see him if you like. I want nothing to do with him." Takanuva expected that Mitoro would be living in a region inhabited by the Komatoran and Frostalus, but he inevitably hadn't been welcomed there. Tama directed his newcomer to an area that was once Powahi, now home to mostly Skakti. There was a small hut of stone. Sat there in a small hut of stone sat Toa Mitoro. "What do you want?" the Toa of Ice said, not knowing, looking up at his visitor. "Go away." "Mitoro, Takanuva began. "You're needed. You have to come with me." Toa Mitoro laughed in a bitter sound. "I was needed 10,000 years ago. My destiny was before me, and I hesitated. And the universe died, so don't tell me I'm needed now. Just leave me alone." "I heard what happened," Takanuva said. "But I also know that in your heart you're a hero. I know how hard you fought on Voya Nui. I'm Mahari Nui, and I know if you could have saved the universe, you would have. You would have done everything to do that." Takanuva, overcome with emotion, had to stop talking. Here was Mitoro, who was dead in his universe, having sacrificed himself to save Mother Nui and every other living thing. Here he was alive, but dead inside, knowing he had failed his people when it mattered most. Mitoro looked up at him. "Who are you?" No one in the kingdom talks about me that way." "I'm from another kingdom," Takanuva answered. "One where people think of you as a hero." "I see," said Mitoro. "Escaped from an alien asylum, did you?" "Okay," said the Toa of Light. "You want to sit here and feel sorry for yourself? You blew your chance to be a hero. Well, here's another one. Here's a chance to show everyone you aren't a failure or a coward. Here's an opportunity to bring some honor to your name. Do you have the courage to take it?" "Why do you care?" asked Mitoro. "I don't even know you." "Maybe I know you," said Takanuva, or someone very close to you. "Now come on, we have a kingdom to save." Tama was not happy to see Mitoro along, but there wasn't time for a prolonged argument. Fortunately, The most likely problem spot was in the same area as Matoro's hut. The area around Kinui was too well traveled for Roxy to have emerged from the unnoticed, but the old Borak tunnels in Powahi were out of the way and were largely ignored. If the light barrier in the main tunnel had come down, it would be easy for Bakuda to send legions up those passageways. Why not just block the tunnels, bring them down? Asked Takanuva. Pohatu and Huki tried doing that during the evacuation, said Tana. The Roxy smashed their way through and killed them both before Tahu, Jowler, and Kopaka drove them back. Light was the only effective means of stopping them. Intense light, more than a Krata could stand. And they couldn't just, dig their way around the barrier or use density control to float back up to the rock. They could, Tanma agreed, but Anua made sure the ground is watered. Any attempt to dig through it or pass through it, we'd know. Matoro had said nothing. Takanuva turned and said, "What do you think?" "I think, never mind," said the Toa of Ice. "What he thinks doesn't matter," snarled Tanma. It does to me," Takanuva replied. "Tell us, Matoro." "Well, what if the barrier didn't go down? What if they found some way to shield themselves against the light? Then we have a problem," said Takanuva. Cautiously, they started down the tunnel. Even this close to the surface, Takanuva could feel a chill in the air. The only light came from Tanma, who kept up a low level of illumination using his Toa power. "We can't go down too far," he said. "There's no heat down there, and what air there might seem still be foul. Most of the universe was flooded, and a lot of water has mutagen in it, so whatever did survive, if the end possibly isn't still recognizable." Takanuva glanced at Matoro. Every word that Toa Tama said was like a dagger in his heart. They walked up, perhaps a kyo when the tunnel was brightened. Takanuva pointed ahead to the wall in their path. "That's the barrier. It was still intact. The problem isn't here. Or Magnia, maybe, or the other access point we don't know about." "Perhaps," said Takanuva, "but what if Matoro is right? What if the barrier simply isn't stopping them anymore?" "I don't have the time for a Matoran myth," said Tama. "I have to check the other possibilities. Are you coming or not?" Takanuva glanced at the barrier. Matoro, and then back at Tama. "All right." The two Toa of Light started back up the tunnel. Neither noticed Matoro wasn't following them up until they heard the sound of ice blasts coming from behind them. Takanuva turned and ran back down, followed closely by Tanma. There was Matoro, battling 4 Roxy on his own. Behind them more were breaching the barrier, each clad in armor made of deep shadow. The armor couldn't have survived the passage through the barrier, dissolving not long after they made contact with the light, but it lasted just long enough to get the Roxy through to the other side. Takanuva and Tanma both dropped 1D and opened fire on their light powers. Takanuva's power lance took out 2 Roxy, where Tanma drove the third back onto the barrier, or where its Krata burned to ashes. Matoro froze the fourth in a block of ice up to its head, just long enough to reach it and yank out its Krata. He threw the squirming creature on the ground and stepped on it. "Excellent," said a soft cylinder voice which seemed to come from every shadow. Takanuva knew it well. It belonged to Pterodax, leader of the Brotherhood. "I see that at least one of you has an immigration." Matoro, my old friend. "It seems like yesterday we were teamed against the Baraki and their hordes." "You," said Matoro, his voice shaking. "Why are you dead? So many others died. Why not you?" What What is there when the night dies, Toa? Darkness, only darkness, Makuta replied, and I thrive in the dark. All my brothers perished one by one. Icarax was the first, driven from his body by my attack so I could possess it. His essence left to die in the cold of the void. But my hatred would not let me die. Hatred of Montanui, hatred of all those escaped to the end of this universe. Most of all, the Toro, hatred for you. You turned me away from my destiny. Montanui was meant to cheat death. Instead, I was cheated of my revenge. Now the Toa heard clanking of armor. Colossus, as if a colossus was coming towards them. The next moment, a 20-foot high giant clad in shadow armor erupted from the barrier. As the shroud of shadow fell away, they could see their foe. It was a bizarre anagram of the Makuta who had attacked Cardanui and others who were unfamiliar. A monstrosity, now truly as ugly as the outside as his spirit within. As my brothers were about to die, I absorbed them into my body, said Pterodax. I used their mass to grow. I used their knowledge to create armor to pierce this barrier, and now your kingdom shall surrender, or will it suffocate in a sea of shadow? Tanma, Matoro, and Takanuva attacked. Bolts of ice and spears of light rained down Pterodax's armor, but the damage was negligible. Well, I have had 10,000 years to prepare for this battle, the Makuta hissed. You cannot win. Excuse us if we try, said Takanuva, blasting his power lance directly at the mask of shadow. The blow knocked the mask off. Makuta bent down to retrieve it, but Tanma was too fast, hitting it with full power and melting it into slag. Tanma, get back! Takanuva shouted, but it was too late. Makuta scooped up the Toa of light like a toy and triggered the shattering power of a pan rack. The Takanuva had to look away. It was simply too horrible to watch. No, do you see, said Makuta. You must. Makuta stopped dead and smiled at Takanuva. Oh, I see. Oh, how intriguing. You're from somewhere else, somewhere where the Toro died and Matanui lived. The plan proceeds. There it is to its inevitable conclusion. Did you flee then, Takanuva? Did you have the wisdom to escape before my reign begins? I died, said Matoro quietly. Yes, Takanuva replied. You did. You gave your life so that billions could live in my universe. You are considered the greatest hero ever to bear the title of Toa. And here you are just one more insect to be crushed, said Makuta, advancing. Or perhaps there is some other use of you. The mask of life still exists, and if you were connected to it, you have the knowledge I could use, Toa of Ice. A hand-made shadow emerged from the Makuta's chest, heading right for Matoro. Takanuva made a move to get in between them, but the Toa of Ice hit him with a barrage of ice shards, driving him back. Matoro, what are you doing? Takanuva cried out. He's going to kill you. I should have died 10,000 years ago, Matoro said. He stood erect, hands at his side, waiting for the hand to seize him. I should have saved everyone, but I didn't. And you think about it, Takanuva, neither of us is meant to be here. The shadow hand took Matoro in its grasp, dragging him unprotesting into the substance of Makuta. Takanuva got to his feet, blasting light from his power lance and shadow from his other hand, screaming, Murderer! Strangely enough, Makuta did not counterattack. In fact, the Colossus actually looked a bit unsteady on his feet. He took a step back and reached out as an armored hand reached out. An armored hand used to support himself, then dropped to his knees. Both hands went to the side of his head, and he shouted, No! My will must prevail. I am stronger. I am. And another voice came from Makuda's mouth. It was Matoro's. No, Makuda. You have once told all the Tolomai that you could not be destroyed because you were nothing. You were wrong. It is because you are nothing that I can destroy you. You have no heart. You have no spirit. You have no reason to exist. Even in your haze, a pale reflection of what was once burned on you. You survive out of habit, monster, and habits and minds can be broken. The scream came from Makuda. Uh, The scream that came from Makuda was then long, loud, and strangely hollow. An instant later, the giant collapsed on the ground and lay unmoving. Takanuva emerged closer and confirmed what he already knew. Makuda was dead. Just to be sure, he used his power of searing light on every corner of the tunnel. There was no sign of the monster's shadows. Antidermis. The shadow's antidermis. He had not escaped this final confrontation. Takanuva pondered for a long time as he walked up to the surface. Turaga Vakaba had once told him that when a Makuda absorbs a body, he must crush the will of his victim immediately, otherwise he risks other minds intruding upon his own will. Matoro had heard the same tales. He had known if Makuda had absorbed him, he could fight back from within. At one such effort, that would have been impossible. Makuda's will would have been too strong, but Matoro had been right. Makuda truly had nothing to live for. He survived and plotted his vengeance, but it was as a hollow pursuit. He had lusted for control of the universe, only to see the universe destroyed. There was no place for him in the kingdom. Takanuva would tell the ruling council what had happened down below and warn them to beware of any other rock shield might still work below, clad in shadow armor. He would stay long enough to see a statue erected of Matoro, the Toa who had been granted the rarest of commodities, a second chance to make things right. Turaga Takanuva would ask his Toa counterpart to stay, even though knowing the answer would be what the answer would be. In the end, the Mutaka of this universe would use the Kanohi Olmec to send Takanuva back into space between dimensions. On his journey to Karnanui, there was much to be done, still a very long way to go. The end.